All right, ongoing attempt to pre-record some lessons in the event that I'm not here with you. Um, the last one was a little bit on the longer side, a little bit more of me talking, but this period, my plan is to get you rolling onto your biweekly document and the source material that you have there, because there's quite a bit to it, and I think it'll be most clear when you see the evidence itself rather than me like tell you about it. Um, to do a quick recap though, and let us roll forward from there. Um, I've got my triangle trade map up here, and if we were doing this live, I would ask you to explain to me why this map is incomplete, or why it's oversimplified. And that's really for a few reasons. One, it shows just a single triangle when in fact there's a multitude of them. That this just one direction of slaves being forcibly brought from Africa to the North and Central and South America, and raw materials being moved back to Europe, and manufactured goods leaving, is a little bit oversimplified, in that we're really looking at multiple triangles that should be used to express what's happening in this Atlantic world context. The other piece that I wanted to push with into this class and make as clear as possible is that enslaved populations are not just providing labor. This map makes it seem as that's the case, that slaves are being moved over to the Americas, and when they're brought there, they are forced to work, and their muscle power is really the thing that is making these colonies successful. And that's true, and it's not to diminish that that doesn't happen. But Rice, which you read about to open this unit, is evidence that slaves provided knowledge, that Europeans had no idea what they were doing trying to grow rice, whereas people from West Africa being brought to the southern colonies were moved into a space that they could grow rice, or their knowledge about growing rice was super valuable. And a large reason that slaves from the West African coast, from rice growing regions, were particularly valuable to people moving slaves back and forth, or from the West African region to North America, is because of that this crop was foundational to the success of these southern colonies, and the slaves, both providing labor and knowledge about how to produce those crops, was also valuable. So this continues for a super long time. I think it's hard to put into timeline perspective how long slavery exists in North America, and specifically in what will become the United States, other than to say that the first slaves were brought to this region in 1619, and that slavery exists in the United States until the end of the Civil War in 1865. So that's 350 years of time. The current United States has only existed since 1783. So it's only been, and I guess if you want to back it up and say since its independence in 1776, it's existed for far less time than slavery existed in the space to begin with. So it's there for a really long period of time. We know that these groups of colonists are going to be successful. They're going to spread out. They're going to declare themselves independent. And they're going to tell this king, we have all these rights to declare ourselves independent. We've dived into this previously and the language around it. When these colonists say, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, they say that in 1776 when they declare themselves independent, but they don't necessarily have a plan for what they're going to do going forward after declaring themselves independent. And they form a government, and as we've seen in this class, the government that they form really falls apart pretty quickly. And they need to try again in the mid 1780s, at the face of a new revolution. These groups of people don't trust each other, they don't like each other, they don't really want to work together, but they need something. One of the biggest things they disagree about is slavery. And even though all three of these colonial regions have benefited from the existence of slavery, and really has made it possible for them to even declare themselves independent, they do debate whether or not they should have slavery in this new country, because some of them do see the hypocrisy, or that they're going back on like some of the more foundational ideals that they said before. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, yet when they're forming their country, they're debating about whether or not slavery should exist or should not exist in it. there's lots of debate over how it could look or how long it should exist. And really that's the meat of your asynchronous and your group time this period. You've got, I'll swing over to the document itself. Again, your rice component should be filled out from the first period. If you scroll down to asynchronous 2, you'll see slavery and constitution documents and questions. And then you have 2 tables worth of questions. The tables are split because the first set of questions is about people who are actually at this constitutional convention. James Madison took super diligent notes at this convention. And so our capacity to really know what people were saying and thinking is quite high, at least in terms of what they were saying to each other. So you have representatives and their words in short summaries, because obviously we don't need a full transcription of the events of the Constitutional Convention that took place over months in time. But Madison's words about what these people were saying is what you've got to deal with here. So you have a primary source. You have 4 different people speaking. You have Mr. Rutledge of South Carolina, Mr. Ellsworth of Connecticut, Hugh Williams of North Carolina, and Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania. Each of them is going to give a perspective on what they think about slavery and how they think slavery should appear in the Constitution and what it should look like. They certainly don't all agree, and you'll see that some of the words that they have are evidence of just continued and ongoing discussion and debate about really what they expect their government to look like. The next part of it, as you scroll down, moves into, well, you have your questions from Madison, which are on the table. But as you scroll further down onto page 3, you have 3 different interpretations or 3 different historians speaking about the events at this Constitutional Convention and how they view this issue of slavery appearing in this moment. So they're historians who are also looking back at Madison's notes and coming to conclusions about what they think they all meant and what the document was designed to do and how it did or did not address slavery. As you move back through that, I would direct you back to my slides, which are posted on Classroom here, and I'll pull this up. You're going to see the reference to this number of 3/5, and I think it'll be easiest if you pull back up this diagram. When these representatives are together, they're creating this 3-branch system of government, and they're creating a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. Within that legislative branch, they debate whether or not they want to have equal representation for every state, or they want it to be based on population. Once they settle on this idea of doing both, they still have to grapple with, wait a minute, are slaves going to count for a state's population? Yes or no? Northern states where there are, or former northern colonies, now northern states, are not interested in having the South be able to count slaves as people, because they're worried that when they count them as people, it's going to increase their representation in this people's house, or this House of Representatives, the one that's based on population, even though those slaves won't be able to vote. The opposite being true for the southern states. So they go back and forth on this, and they settle on this idea of, we'll count slaves as a partial person, or 3/5. This is one of the only places that slavery is going to be directly addressed in the Constitution. The other one is going to be in 1807. They're going to agree to end the import of slaves, or the end of make it illegal to move slaves from West Africa into the United States, or this new country, the United States. In terms of leading to the end of slavery, ending the import does not actually solve the problem of slavery. It really only makes it worse from 1807 forward, but that's where we'll pick up going into next week. So that's my rundown of the lesson. Again, the majority of your time should be spent with looking at the second asynchronous 2. I'm hoping that you can get into groups because you'll have a sub to work through it with, but if that's not the case, you can solo it, and we'll come back together and talk through it as a class going into next week. With that, thank you all for sticking through another video lesson.